I was reaching for my reading glasses when the pharmacist said my insurance had been canceled 3 months ago, and I had no idea what she was talking about. My name is Walter Brennan. I'm 58, and that Thursday afternoon started like any other. I'd come in for my blood pressure refill, the same prescription I'd been filling at that counter for 6 years. The girl behind the register, Crystal, was new. Couldn't have been more than 25, and she looked at her screen twice before she looked at me. "Sir, I'm showing your Medicare supplement lapsed back in February. You'll have to pay out of pocket today or call your insurance company." I told her that was impossible. I paid that premium myself, automatic draft, same account every month since my wife Carol passed. She shrugged, not unkindly, and said the system didn't lie, and that would be $68 for the 30-day supply. I paid it. I didn't have a choice. But I sat in my truck in that parking lot for a long while after, the engine running, my hands resting on the wheel, going back over every conversation I'd had about money in the last 6 months, trying to find the one that didn't add up. It had been 2 years since Carol died. Cancer, fast at the end, slow enough at the start that we had time to talk about things people don't usually talk about. The house, the insurance, what she wanted for our boys. We had 2. Marcus, my oldest, 34, a contractor over in Dayton, married with a little girl, the kind of son who shows up unannounced with a six-pack and fixes your gutters without being asked. And then there was Brett, 31, who'd moved back in with me after Carol died because, in his words, "Somebody's gotta make sure you're eating right, Dad." Brett had been between jobs more often than not. Carol used to call him a late bloomer. I used to call him something less generous, only to myself and only on bad days. When Carol got sick, we did what a lot of people do. We put Brett's name on the checking account, since he was the one home, the one driving her to chemo 3 times a week while I was still working the floor at the plant. It made sense at the time. Somebody needed to be able to write a check for the oxygen company at 8 in the morning when I was 45 minutes away on a forklift. Marcus had his own family, his own mortgage, 2 hours away. Brett was right there. After Carol passed, I never took his name off. I told myself it was because I trusted him. The truth, looking back, is that I never thought about it again. Grief does that. It makes you stop looking at the things right in front of you. That account was supposed to hold a little over $190,000. My pension lump sum, the life insurance payout, and what we got when we sold the lake property up in Put-in-Bay, the one Carol's father had left her. I hadn't touched the bulk of it. I was living off my Social Security and a small monthly draw, the way Carol and I had planned it. So it would still be there if I ended up in a home someday, or if I wanted to leave something behind for the grandkids. I drove straight to the bank instead of home. The branch was on Worcester Pike, the same one Carol and I had used for almost 30 years. I knew most of the tellers by name, the way you do in a town where nothing much changes. The woman at the second window, Diane Castellano, had cashed my paychecks back when I still had paychecks to cash. She smiled when she saw me, then the smile faded when I asked her to print a full statement going back a year. "Everything okay, Walter?" "Just want to look something over," I said, keeping my voice easy. The way you do when you don't want to say the real thing out loud yet. She printed it, 11 pages. I sat down at the little round table by the window, where they keep the lollipops for kids, and I started reading. By the 3rd page, my coffee was cold, and my hands weren't quite steady. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize going back at least 8 months. 200 here, 400 there. Never anything big enough to trip an alarm. Never the same amount twice. A cash withdrawal of $1,500 in April that I had absolutely no memory of authorizing. A wire transfer for $6,000 in June, memo line blank, to an account I didn't recognize. And buried in October, $11,000, withdrawn over 4 separate days. Like somebody had learned exactly how the system worked and exactly how to stay under whatever line gets a manager's attention. I did the math in my head, slow, the way I do everything now, since the stroke I had 2 years before Carol got sick, the one that left my left hand a little stubborn on cold mornings. Just over $41,000, gone, over 8 months, while I sat at that kitchen table eating the dinners my son cooked for me, thanking God I had a boy who cared enough to stay. I asked Diane if she could tell me who'd made the withdrawals. She got quiet, the kind of quiet that tells you she already knows something you don't. "Walter, I can't discuss an other account holder's activity with you specifically, but I can tell you that any withdrawal from that account, by policy, requires the signature or card of an authorized signer. You're the primary. The only other authorized signer on file is, she paused, it's your son, Brett. I sat there for a second like she told me the sky was a different color than I'd always thought it was. There has to be an explanation, I said, mostly to myself. There might be, Diane said. Careful. The way you talk to a man you've watched lose his wife and don't want to be the one who breaks something else in him. I'm not saying it's what it looks like. I'm saying you should ask him. I didn't say anything to Brett that night. I told myself I needed proof first, needed to understand it before I confronted it, because the man knows how to talk his way around a Thursday like nobody I've ever met. He could sell a screen door to a submarine, my father used to say about men like that, except he was saying it about Brett specifically, more than once before he died, so I watched. For 2 weeks I watched my own son in my own house, which is a strange and ugly thing to do to a person you raised, and I want to be honest that some part of me hated myself the whole time for doing it. What I noticed, once I started looking, were the small things I'd let myself stop noticing. The new truck Brett was driving, a Silverado, leased, he said, a buddy hooked me up. The phone, the newer model, the kind that comes out twice a year and costs more than my truck payment used to. The trips. A long weekend fishing with the guys in Tennessee that turned out, based on a receipt I found in the laundry, to be 3 nights at a casino resort outside Nashville. He was 31 years old and hadn't held a steady job in over a year, but he was eating out 4 nights a week, and his Venmo, which I only saw because his phone was face up on the counter one night while he was in the shower, showed payments going out to a woman's name I didn't recognize. Madeline. 300 here, 500 there. I didn't snoop on purpose. I want to say that clearly, because I'm not proud of looking. But once you've seen your dead wife's money disappearing into a stranger's Venmo handle, you stop caring much about what's proud and what isn't. I called Marcus on a Sunday, sat in my truck in the church parking lot so Brett wouldn't hear, and I told him everything. My oldest boy went quiet on the phone, in a way that scared me more than if he'd yelled. Dad, he finally said, I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, because I didn't have proof, just a feeling. But Brett asked me for $4,000 back in March, told me it was for a security deposit on an apartment, that he was finally moving out, getting his life together. I gave it to him because I wanted to believe that too. He never moved out. We agreed not to confront him yet. Marcus, who'd spent 15 years building houses and knew something about foundations, told me not to go in without something solid under my feet. Get the actual records, Dad. Not what you think you saw, what you can prove. So I went back to the bank, and this time I asked for something specific. The security camera footage tied to 3 of the in-person cash withdrawals, the ones from the branch itself, not the ATM ones I couldn't pin to a face. Diane couldn't pull that for me on her own, but she walked me to the branch manager, a younger man named Curtis. And Curtis, after I explained what I'd found, agreed to review it. Since elder financial exploitation is something banks in Ohio are required by state law to take seriously once a customer raises a concern. It took 4 days. Curtis called me himself, didn't make me come in for it, said it felt like the kind of thing that shouldn't wait. The footage showed Brett at the counter, 3 separate times, using a debit card with my account number, withdrawing cash, signing a slip with a signature that, Curtis said carefully, doesn't entirely match the signature card we have on file for him, but it's close enough that our teller had no reason to flag it. Authorized signer or not, something in how Curtis said it told me the bank itself was already worried about its own exposure here. I drove home that afternoon and I sat in the driveway for 40 minutes before I went inside. I kept thinking about the year Brett was 9, the year he broke his arm falling off the shed roof, trying to fly with a bedsheet cape. How he cried, not because of the pain, but because he was sure I'd be disappointed in him. I wasn't disappointed in him that day. I carried him to the truck myself. When I finally went in, he was at the kitchen table eating the dinner he'd made. Pork chops, the way Carol used to do them, which was its own kind of cruelty, him cooking his mother's recipe with money he'd stolen from her memory. I didn't yell. I want people to understand that, because I think the version of this story where the father screams is the easy version, the version that doesn't cost you anything. I sat down across from him, and I put the bank statement on the table, the pages I'd highlighted in yellow, and I slid them across to him without a word. He looked at it for a long time, longer than it should have taken to read 11 highlighted lines. Dad, he started, and the way he said it, soft, careful, told me he'd had this conversation rehearsed in his head for longer than I wanted to think about. It's not what it looks like. I was gonna pay it back. I had a thing going with some guys, an investment, it just hasn't paid off yet. But it will, and I was always gonna. $41,000, Brett. I know the number, Dad. Your mother's money. He flinched at that. Good. He should have. I've been taking care of you, he said, and his voice cracked in a way that 2 weeks earlier would have broken my heart instead of making me angrier than I've been in years. Who do you think makes you dinner? Who do you think drives you to your appointments when your hand's acting up? Marcus is 2 hours away playing house with his perfect little family. I'm the one who's here. You were here, I said, because it was convenient for you to be here, not because you were taking care of me. You were taking care of yourself on my dime, while I thanked God every night I had a son who cared. He tried a few more angles after that it was technically his name on the account too, that I'd never put any limits on what he could withdraw, that I should have been more on top of it if it mattered so much to me. That last one is the part that still sits in my chest sideways, even now. The idea that the crime becomes my fault if I wasn't watching closely enough while I was busy grieving my wife. I called Marcus that night and told him everything. The casino trip, the Venmo, Madeline, the leased truck, all of it laid out the way Brett himself, in his own clumsy way, had confirmed without ever quite admitting. Marcus didn't say much. He just told me to get a lawyer in the morning, and he'd be at my house by 9. The lawyer, a woman named Carla Whitfield, who'd handled Carol's estate paperwork 2 years before, was blunt with me in a way I needed. She said that because Brett was a legal authorized signer, criminal prosecution would be an uphill climb to prove intent versus mismanagement, but that I had every right to remove him from the account immediately, and that if I wanted to pursue civil recovery, the bank's own footage and statements would matter a great deal. She also said something I hadn't thought about that surprised me coming from a lawyer rather than a pastor. That whatever I decided to do about pressing charges, the money was probably less important in the long run than deciding who I wanted in my life going forward, and that those didn't have to be the same decision. I removed Brett from the account that same week. Curtis walked me through it personally. No court order needed since I was the primary account holder, and Brett's role had only ever been convenience signer. A designation, it turned out, the bank could revoke at my request alone, something Diane had been too cautious to tell me outright that first day. Maybe out of policy, maybe because she didn't want to be the one who handed me the easy way out of a hard conversation. Brett moved out within the month, not because I threw him out, though I won't pretend the thought hadn't crossed my mind every day for 2 weeks. He left on his own, the way people do when the free ride ends and the room gets too honest to stay in. He took the lease on the Silverado with him, and as far as I know, the relationship with Madeline didn't survive the casino trips drying up either. We talk maybe once every 2 months now. Short calls, polite. He's working construction with a crew out of Columbus, last I heard, which is more than he was doing before. And some nights I let myself hope that losing the easy money was the worst and best thing that ever happened to him. Marcus is the one who comes around now, the way he always did, except I see it differently these days. I used to measure how much my sons loved me by how often they showed up, and Marcus showing up less always felt, unfairly, like it meant less. I understand now that showing up with clean hands and clear distance was its own kind of honesty, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you while it's happening. I still bank at that branch on Worcester Pike. Diane still works the second window. Last month, she told me, quietly, while she was processing a deposit, that she'd lost some sleep over not saying more to me sooner that first day. I told her she didn't owe me an apology, that she'd given me exactly what I needed when I needed it. 4 words that told me to sit down before the rest of the floor fell out from under me, and a name written carefully enough on a printed statement that I had to go find the rest myself. Some nights I still think about that pork chop dinner, the one made from Carol's recipe, with stolen money, and I wonder if Brett even understood what he was doing while he was doing it, or if a man can talk himself so far around the truth that he believes his own version of it by the time he's serving dinner. I don't know the answer. I'm not sure I need it anymore. What I know is this. The son who never asked me for a thing built his own life 2 hours away and still finds time to drive over and fix what's broken without being told it's broken. The son who never left my side took everything he could reach while I wasn't looking and called it love the whole time he was doing it. I don't regret putting Brett's name on that account when Carol was dying. I'd make the same choice again because you don't plan for your children to become strangers wearing your son's face. But I check my statements every single month now, every line, every withdrawal, the way I should have been doing all along. Trust isn't something you give once and forget about. It's something you keep checking on, the same way you check on a furnace pilot light in winter, quietly, regularly before you ever smell the smoke.